Okay.
it's recorded, so I guess we'll just like swap spots.
Okay. It's a little awkward, but
Yeah, but it's okay.
yeah.
All right. All right, I guess I'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to get started here as some folks keep trickling in. Thanks, everyone, for joining our session this afternoon. We're really excited to be here. We're going to spend the next hour and a half or so sharing about some innovative policy approaches that are being taken at the state and the local level to transform thirsty landscapes from higher water use non-functional turf grass to water-wise landscaping. So John and I are just going to give a brief high-level overview of some efforts that are going on at the state level, and then we will turn it over to our panelists to share about some successes and lessons learned that are happening in their communities. Before getting started, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Victoria Arling. I'm the Colorado Basin Program Manager with the nonprofit Water Now Alliance. We're a national nonprofit focusing on developing sustainable, equitable, affordable, and climate resilient solutions across communities. Our work falls into three main buckets, which includes policy advocacy, education and engagement, and technical assistance programs. And I'll just turn it over to John.
Thank you, Victoria. So my name is John Berggren, and I work for Western Resource Advocates. We're also a nonprofit working around the West on a variety of issues. I'm on our water team, work to help communities become more water efficient. We've been working with kind of land use planners and coordinating land use planning with water efficiency for about 6 or 7 years now. We do a lot of education, outreach, technical assistance, things like this, and helped write a guidebook in 2019 written for planners about how to incorporate water efficiency throughout the entire planning process, from comp plans all the way down to ordinances, zoning, and post-occupancy enforcement. So I do have a bunch of these mini brochures of that guidebook. If folks are interested, I really should have brought an actual guidebook, but it's a free PDF on our website, so I'm happy to share that. It's really helpful for planners interested in water efficiency. So why are supposed to be 5, but 4 water conservation folks at a planning conference? I'm sure most folks are aware we're facing pretty significant water challenges around the West and here in Colorado. It seems like you can't go a day without something in the news about the Colorado River, about Lake Powell, Lake Mead, what's going on here in Colorado. We're constantly hearing about first ever shortages, first ever federal shortages. I just saw the latest Bureau of Reclamation forecast for next year, and there's a chance Lake Powell actually gets so low can't generate hydropower. So we're facing this fundamental challenge in the West around water efficiency. Obviously, agriculture is the biggest user of water on the West, but our cities are a really important player. And so the way that our cities are growing and developing and redeveloping is essential to help meet some of these challenges that we're facing in the coming years. And most importantly, water conservation is our cheapest and fastest and most reliable way to kind of stretch water supplies. You can go out and purchase new water, you can build new infrastructure, but conservation historically has been the cheapest way to increase your supply and become more reliable. The topic of our panel is transforming landscapes here in Colorado. 50% of the water in the municipal sector is used for outdoor landscapes, and a majority of that is used for irrigating high water turf grass. I'm sure most folks know if you drive around, you see a lot of turf grass here in Colorado and around the West. And replacing or limiting how much water we use for that turf grass or how much turf grass we grow is a great way to conserve water, to make us more water resilient and help meet those challenges. Folks might have heard this term non-functional or non-essential turf. It's a concept Victoria will get in a little more detail, but just the idea that there's a lot of this turf that literally the only person who walks on it is the person who mows it. I think park strips, medians, slopes, other areas where the turf just doesn't get used. And certainly there are areas of turf that are functional that Victoria will talk about, but this is one idea of this non-functional or non-essential turf. That's kind of where we should start when we're thinking about replacing some of that for water conservation.
Thanks, John. So building off a little bit of what John mentioned, that we do just want to re-emphasize that there is a right time and a right place for turf grass. So think about your public parks, schools, recreational fields, even your backyard for your kids, your dogs, yourself, areas that really have an overall community benefit. But really for the purposes of our conversation today and this project that John and I and many others in this space have been working on for a while, we're really aiming to hone in and transform those areas of non-functional or that non-essential turf grass. So again, those park strips, sloped areas, parking lots, things like that. And really try and transform them to some type of water-wise landscaping practice. So just a brief overview, water-wise landscaping can really encompass an extraordinary range and depth of plants, including, trees, shrubs, native grasses, and wildflowers that are really more appropriately adapted to the local climate factors. It's really both a plant and a water management strategy that's functional, attractive, and emphasizes plants that do have that lower supplemental water need, while also matching that landscaping with an efficient irrigation system, hydrozoning, mulching, adding soil amendments, different best practices like that. And so last year we did a policy scan to get a better understanding of the state of local turf replacement programs that are in Colorado, and I just wanted to highlight a few of our findings that are up here on the slide. So currently in Colorado, there are 22 cities and water providers that do offer turf replacement incentive programs, and currently all of these cities are on the Front Range. Most of the incentive programs are geared towards residential customers, but there are a few programs that do have commercial rebates and incentives. And many of these programs, these rebates are coming in between $1 to $2 per square foot of turf converted to an alternative water-wise landscape. For the providers that are measuring water savings, they are generally seeing about a 1 to 2 acre foot of water savings per year from coming out of these programs. And then in addition, several providers do offer programs that are specifically tailored to lower income community members, where they are directly going to that customer, replacing the landscape for them, rather than having the customer kind of manage the process from start to finish and then receiving a rebate check at the end of their project. Let's see, so lots of these cities and water providers are responsible for developing all of their program guidelines. So really anything from how to verify that turf replacement project, determining what qualifies as an acceptable landscape, and then also whether to require things like irrigation system updates, those types of program guidelines. I just want to highlight one local nonprofit based out of the Front Range, Resource Central. They work with a lot of municipalities and water providers and help them implement their turf conversion programs. And then finally, many of these programs do run out of funding each year. So that's really showing that the demand is high. And then, with all of the everything going on with the Colorado River Basin shortages, that the demand will continue to increase year after year.
So as Victoria mentioned, there are currently 22 communities that have these turf replacement programs. That only represents about 25% of Coloradans. So 75% of Coloradans don't have access to a financial incentive to help replace their turf. So earlier this year, the General Assembly, the state legislature passed HB 1151, which established a statewide turf replacement program. Technically, it was introduced first. It was going to be the first in the entire country, but Utah ended up adopting their statewide program slightly before Colorado, so it's the second technically, but we thought of it first. And what this did was it allocated $2 million to two things: help supplement those existing programs, so the 22 cities that currently have programs can apply for matching funds to make their dollars go farther. And then for the 75% of Coloradans that don't live in a jurisdiction with a turf replacement program, the state will set up through a third party a pot of money for them to access. So everyone in the state, once this is established, hopefully next spring, will have access to financial incentives to help replace their turf with more water efficient landscaping. One really cool thing to see with that bill, which was $2 million program, so not huge, there was a lot of interest both in the media and the general public about that bill, about turf replacement. Like I was saying, you can't turn on the news these days without seeing something about drought and water in the West. And we saw that there was a lot of interest ginned up from that bill about thinking about water efficient landscapes, thinking about replacing turf and looking at replacing your front yards and other non-used turf. And as Victoria mentioned, a lot of those existing programs, the 22 communities, run out annually. We talked to most of them, and I think they all said we ran out even quicker this year. People really want to take advantage of these types of programs, so clearly there's a demand for replacing your turf.
So over the last year, both Water Now and Western Resource Advocates partnered on a project aimed to enable large-scale turf conversion projects across Colorado. And this past spring, we actually published a white paper that identifies 6 different funding and financing opportunities available to Colorado water providers to help scale up their turf replacement incentive programs. Just want to briefly highlight this. The paper is available on both of our websites, listed at the bottom of the screen. And I'd say if you're a water provider really considering scaling up your program and trying to learn more about how to do that, I would definitely check this paper out or reach out to John or I at any time. And some of you may have heard about this, but just last month, many major water providers in the Colorado River Basin, including Denver Water, Aurora Water, where we have Tim here, and Pueblo Water in Colorado, came together and signed an MOU committing to significant reductions in their water use. There's still a few details to work out in this MOU, but essentially it does address introducing a program to reduce that quantity of non-functional turfgrass by 30% through the replacement of, water-wise landscaping. So, this is definitely a step in the right direction, and it's good to see that there's a lot of water providers in the West that are getting behind this concept, and we'll hear a bit more about that from our speakers today as well. And then, one last thing I just wanted to highlight is out of those, I guess, let's say 22 water providers in Colorado that have turf replacement programs, 10 of these communities have established turf limits for new development in their municipal codes. These standards can vary considerably, based on the municipality, with Aurora Water really leading the way down in the Front Range, and I think Tim's going to discuss that as well in a little bit. So I just want to highlight there is more to the overall picture of municipal water conservation than just requiring turf limits. Many communities have developed water efficient ordinances as it relates to building construction, other aspects of outdoor landscaping besides turf, water reuse, and more. So there is a lot to do in this integrated water and land use planning space.
And just to briefly highlight one of those, as you talked about, you can replace existing turf through incentives or requirements. You can prevent new turf from going in, new non-essential turf from going in new developments. And one third area that we've really seen a lot of interest is, regardless of what type of landscapes you have, the landscape and irrigation professionals being up to speed on best practices and being certified in water efficient landscaping and irrigation. And so there's an effort around the state to get our irrigation and landscape professionals certified. These are just some of the programs available. If you think like plumbers, electricians, they have to be certified by the state. There's a licensure they have to achieve. That doesn't exist in the landscape and irrigation field. And so we're trying to think through ways of expanding it so that more of those landscape professionals are certified. This really caught my eye when I heard a couple of years ago that you can have the best designed landscape and irrigation plan on paper, but if the person who designs it, installs it, and maintains it isn't up to speed, you can lose a lot of those water efficiency gains that you had on paper. So getting our landscape and irrigation professionals certified is one key way to do that. And just to see where things stand when it comes to certification, we did a survey a year ago of water providers around the state. I'm not sure if folks in the back probably can't read that, but number of community responses on the y-axis, and we just asked them what are they currently doing when it comes to certification, and several offer trainings, some require their park staff to be certified, some actually maintain a list of certified professionals or require certification, but it's all over the place, and some don't do anything. And so this idea of getting your landscape and irrigation professionals up to speed is another kind of tool to help improve the water efficiency of your outdoor landscapes. So I just want to highlight that as well. Okay, so that was just kind of a high-level overview of water efficient landscapes and trends here in Colorado around the West. More importantly, we have our really expert speakers today. And each of them is going to go through and tell a little bit about what they've done and what they've seen in their communities when it comes to outdoor landscapes and water efficiency. We have a couple questions for our panelists, and then we'll definitely have time to open up for you all if you have questions for our panelists. These are these two especially, but Rob from the City of Aspen, who's not here, we're hoping he walks in the door any second, are some of the best experts when it comes to water conservation in the state. If I have any questions, it's Dina and Tim that I go to first. So Tim York is the Water Conservation Supervisor for the City of Aurora. Dina Egenhoff is the Water Conservation Manager for the City of Greeley for Greeley Water and Sewer Department. So I will turn, I think, Tim, you're on first.
My name is Rob, in case you didn't like this. He's not here, so.
Speaking on behalf of Aspen.
I'm here with Aspen. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. It's really exciting from the water side of things to be at a planning conference. I had all planned out what I was going to talk about, and I was telling John earlier I was sitting outside and kind of changed things a little bit. In the water side of things, on the water conservation side of things, when we talk about transforming thirsty landscapes, which is the title of this, we are typically talking about those landscape conversion projects, so rebate programs. How do we get this thirsty turf out of landscapes that have been built in Aurora for 70 years? And a lot of us are doing those things already. We've been doing them for a long time. So for the last 15 years, Aurora has been paying residents, large properties to remove this turf that John mentioned. The only time it's ever walked on is when it's mowed, and replace it with something that's appropriate for Colorado. We handle that in a little bit of a unique way. For a lot of municipalities, turf conversion programs you've probably seen them, a certain dollar per square foot value, $1 per square foot, $2 per square foot. We take a little bit of a different approach, and we assign a max value for that landscape. And the idea behind that is if somebody, back up a little bit, these projects are expensive, which is why the savings numbers, although is usually cheaper, and we always tout how cheap conservation is because that means I get to keep working at the City of Aurora. They're cheap, but compared to other incentive programs that we do as water professionals, they're the most expensive. They have the longest return on investment, they're the most expensive for the utility, and they're also the most expensive for the customer. So there's an opportunity to allow customers who may not be able to afford to do these in the same manner or afford to do something really, really high end. We assign a value that's a maximum dollar value so everybody can participate, whether they do the minimum that's required by code or the maximum and go above and beyond. We also take a little bit of a unique approach with our commercial or multifamily properties. And this is where we start to see a blend between incentive and policy, or stick and carrot, right? Incentives are great when we talk about existing or converting these existing thirsty landscapes. Incentives, unfortunately, don't work very well when we talk about new development, which is where you all as planners and landscape architects come in. Where we blend this in our multifamily and large property communities is we'll give them up to $50,000 for a project, for each individual project. If they want more, we'll give them a little bit more, but this is where the policy comes in. So they can have more money, but then they have to sign an agreement saying we'll only use X amount of water, or they're going to get penalized and essentially pay that rebate back if we're not seeing the savings. Essentially, they'll pay up to 3 times the normal rate of water, and that never goes away. Every year that gets reset. So those are a couple of the incentive programs we've done for a long time. Initially, I was going to really dive into the incentives, but I wanted to focus a little bit more on, since this is a planning conference, how are we handling new development? How are we handling growth, right? Because that's what has not been done a lot in the West. Now we can look at Southern Nevada Water Authority, who has really been the leader in conservation. They've been doing this for 30 years, not just with existing properties, but with new development. And Aurora has kind of become the first in Colorado to take some of these big steps. When we talk about new development, we tried the carrot, right? We tried incentives. One of the first programs we did in 2015 was to offer a tap fee reduction for new development instead of putting in turf or putting in native areas. The way our tap fees are structured, they're conservation focused, and you pay a certain dollar amount per square foot for the type of landscape you're installing. For example, for every square foot of thirsty, Kentucky bluegrass in Colorado, turf you put in, it's about $3.50 per square foot just for the tap fee. For water-wise landscapes, it's usually about half, but if they were to put in native landscapes, whether it's native vegetation or native grasses that didn't need water after 3 years, they essentially paid $0 per square foot. Developers like to save money, so that program went crazy. Again, though, we were able to meld that tap fee, or I'm sorry, that kind of penalty into that policy. So they also sign an agreement that says, okay, you're giving us this discount, we're only going to use this amount of water per year, and if we go over, they start paying back that capital fee they didn't pay up front. So that's when we first started seeing policy from the water side get kind of pushed into the planning of these new developments. Water-wise landscapes weren't new at that time. Our planning department, we have a planning guy here from Aurora. Back in the early 2000s, they started thinking about this too and said, well, how do we make sure that our planning documents, our development ordinances, not really incentivized because there's no money incentivization there, but how do we make sure that we're putting out there that bluegrass isn't the best for everywhere in Colorado? From the water side, we said, well, how can we help? How can we incentivize that as well? This was the biggest carrot I think we ever put out there, which was for new development to say, hey, look, if you build single-family residential and you don't put any turf in the front yard, we'll give you a tap fee credit. We'll save you some money there. I've been out of rural water for 10 years. We did nine homes. So some incentives don't work. Yeah, it's pretty sad. And so that's kind of where we ended up today with the new policy. So just in August, I actually watched the presentation from a small hotel room in Alaska. We took to City Council an ordinance that was a group effort between Aurora Water, City of Aurora Planning, Parks, Recreation, Open Space, Public Works, that said, hey, we really need to do something. We need to limit the amount of non-functional turf, which is kind of hard to define, but we need to get these thirsty landscapes out of Aurora as we continue to grow. We're maybe 50% built out. We got a long ways to go, and we're going to need some more water. Again, first one in Colorado to do it. We're seeing some other municipalities follow up. Castle Rock just got one passed, which is super exciting. But here's essentially what the policy says. No turf in front yards. So you might think we're going to look like Las Vegas. If we do it right, we can have some really beautiful water-wise landscapes appropriate for Colorado. The biggest one, no more tree lawns. If I never hear the word tree lawn ever again, it'll be too soon. Luckily, our planning department in 2017, I think, took the word tree lawn out of the development ordinance, changed it to curbside landscape. Is everybody here from Colorado? Show of hands, yeah? Okay. You're all planners, you're all going to know this answer. How much water does Kentucky bluegrass need in Colorado in a growing season? And we'll go with gallons per square foot. Dina's not allowed to answer. That's pretty close. We'll give you that one, yeah. Little on the low side for Aurora. If it's 100% efficient irrigation system, none of them are. In an average year, which the last 5 have not been, it's about 17.5 gallons per square foot. So for every 10-foot wide area of tree lawn, that's 100 feet long, we're talking about 20,000 gallons of water. We don't need turf there. So this ordinance said, all right, no more turf, no more tree lawns. It's got to be water-wise landscape and the curbside landscape, and no more even spray irrigation there. If you want to put native there, fine. We're done water in the streets. They don't grow. Sidewalks don't grow. As much water as you put on them, it just doesn't work. So those were the two biggest. No Kentucky bluegrass, no new turf at commercial properties or multifamily unless they are defined kind of programmed spaces. So we want to make sure we have spaces, especially at multifamily, for the kids to play, for families to use. But no more of this street-to-street, entire property-wide Kentucky bluegrass. Where it gets a little bit tricky is with parks, recreation, and open space. They're governed by a different set of rules in a way. They do their own their own review. So we're working with them to make sure that we're setting maximums on some of these spaces so that when they're doing their reviews, we're reducing some of that non-functional turf there as well. So all of this just went in August. The biggest one, I almost forgot. No new golf courses in the entire city that use Kentucky bluegrass or use cool season turf. So the way we're defining these is cool season turf is anything that uses more than 15 inches of water per year. Water-wise landscapes in Colorado can use much less than 15, but that's kind of the number that we've been on for 20 or 30 years when we talk about tap fees. So anything that uses more than that, that's what's out as part of the new ordinance. So we will no longer see new golf course development in the city of Aurora, which is pretty exciting. They can use about 1 million gallons a day, if you've ever wondered how much water a golf course uses. But again, so this just came in August. The grandfather date is the end of this month, so after a few more days, any site plan that has not been submitted with an application will no longer be able to have bluegrass in all of these areas. We're hoping to see about a 25% reduction in outdoor water use moving forward. It's a question we get a lot. How much water are you actually going to save by doing this? We'll let you know in about 3 years. We know it's better for the community. We know we're going to save some water. We know it's something that we have to do. But anytime you have human behavior involved, which you always do on irrigating landscapes, the actual numbers that you're going to get are hard to tell. So that's it for me, and I will turn it over to Dina.
This is live, okay. All right. So I'm Dina Egenhoff. I'm with the City of Greeley. I mean, I stand and walk and talk because that's how I usually function. So I've actually only been with the City of Greeley for 1 year and 9 months. So, but prior to, I was with the City of Cheyenne in Wyoming. Anybody in Wyoming? Yeah, that's what happens. So anyway, I was the only water conservation manager of the whole entire state of Wyoming, so I relied on my folks and colleagues from here in Colorado all the time. So I was always thinking about how in Wyoming I'm the sole cowgirl, and I want to tell everybody, I don't want your grass. Colorado, I don't want your grass. And so trying to figure out how to do it. What can I do and how can I do it the most efficiently? So immediately I went back and I said, hey, what about city codes? I can help write city codes. I can help manage city codes. Maybe I can convince the city of Cheyenne to start doing some turf reduction or reduction in some of these thirsty landscapes and think about hydrozones a little bit more. So I started working with them for a number of years. I was with the board for about 5 years, and it took me about 5 years until finally some landscape codes were actually changed there. But unfortunately I moved and I went down to the City of Greeley. And there we've already had some amazing water conservation aspects in place. In fact, I'll tell you the amazing fact, 1893 was our first water restrictions. All right, anybody else can beat me? I don't think so. So Greeley's always been a trendsetter. In fact, we were the first in the state to do something called a water budget. So each resident has a specific allocated amount of water that they're given. And they're given an amount for indoor, and they're given an amount for outdoor. And it's customized for each resident. So we actually delineate how much area can be irrigated for your landscape outside your residential, and we give you a budget for that too. So guess what? If you stay within your water budget, you get the lowest tier rate. If you start going above that, you have to pay more. So something's wrong if you're going with the second tier rate, just to let you know. So going from that aspect for Greeley, we kind of wanted to expand this concept of water conservation even deeper. And so what happened is a lot of synergy happened when we went to growing water-wise. And so, we went and we got together with our planners because it really takes coalition. So if you do not know who your water conservation manager is, oh my gosh, go talk to them. We're really knowledgeable and we want to do well. So a couple of things happened is that we came up with this landscape policy plan for water efficiency. So we sat down with planners, urban forestry, parks, kind of coming up with a plan. What do we want to do? And we wanted to institutionalize this. So guess what? It's an ordinance. People signed this document. Sometimes I have to remind them they signed the document, but it's in there. Essentially kind of steps what we can do to try to bring down that thirst, this thirst. So anyway, This is our destiny, right? Everybody in this room, you're the future destiny. And we right here, we're out here to save your asses, okay? Excuse my language. But geez, oh Pete, we need to be water-wise and water-conscious in every single move that we do. So when we're developing, we need to develop smarter. We need to develop wiser. And so things that we can do on our end is that the City of Greeley is taking a little bit of a twist of things. So we have something, we used to call it cash for grass, but then grass was not necessarily the best thing for cash because we got some weird incentives going on. So we decided to change it to Life After Lawn. So there's Life After Lawn, and that Life After Lawn program started as a pilot project. So if you want to do anything in your community, use the word pilot project. Right? So you do a pilot project, and essentially in 2018, we started this out, converting landscapes that are already healthy turf and making them into more water-wise landscapes. And so that started out, we essentially started building. So just in 2020, we did about 63,000 square feet conversions. In 2021, we did 83, and now we're in 2022, and we're around 150,000 square feet. So we've doubled it. People are interested in this program. We pay them $1 a square foot. It also, I looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, I have to go and battle this at my annual budget all the time, right? I've got an annual budget. I'm like, all right, this is what I really want. This is what I really need. Oh, you don't want to give it to me? Oh, crap. I got to get rid of something else. I don't want to have that battle over and over again for a program. So I asked, and I said, hey, do you think we can just say that Life After Lawn is actually an asset? This is an asset for delaying infrastructure. This is an asset to shave off peaks from our plants. This is an asset that will help delay larger capital improvement projects. So why can't Life After Lawn be a capital improvement project? And guess what? They said yes. So we shift from an annual budget over to what we call CIP, capital improvement projects. So at least I have a 5-year budget in place with an inflation rate into it too. Yeah. So we're doing really well there. So again, it's kind of what Tim said too. We look at things as a return on investment. Every single program I'm looking at, I figure out how many gallons of water do I save? Rain barrel versus toilet. Okay, how much do I save? How much incentive should I give? And what's my return on investment? And what's the customer's return on investment? And so looking at it from an economic standpoint, it's a way to basically saying that we've got our services as water conservation managers having value. They are an asset, and they are considered part of our economics. So another thing I just kind of wanted to mention too is that we have a gap. John had mentioned about the plumbers. Plumbers have to be certified. Electricians have to be certified. Are you a landscape irrigation specialist? Guess what? You pop it up in your own business. You can be an irrigation expert right now. You don't have to know what you're doing, and we see it. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to incentivize getting more certifications. There are great programs out there, so we're actually paying some of our landscape and irrigation folks to go out and get certified. I'm right now working with some of our public schools. There's programs where kids need a little bit more alternative education. They have to work because they have to support their families. So getting through high school is really hard for them, and sometimes they're the ones that end up into the industry of landscapes or irrigation. So we're looking at maybe trying to bridge and having them almost get their certifications ahead of time, be water-wise and water-smart, and then send them into the industry to make that living. So kind of, working again at educational opportunities. And then I think another thing, too, is that we all can do our part, but again, it takes that collaboration and getting to know different people, breaking down those barriers, and figuring out how to institutionalize our ideas. And so if you don't like anything I said, my name's Rob. Rob 2. We got Rob 1 and then Rob 2. All right, and so that's about it from my standpoint, unless you wanted me to keep talking. I can keep going. I just I want to thank too, because I did actually have the opportunity to provide testimony in front of legislation. Has anybody ever done that before? You have. How many layers of deodorant did you put on? I put on at least 3. Right? And so it's really intimidating. However, that's one of the best ways you can get into something that's not just for your region, but more that whole entire state concept, because we're all in this together. I don't care if you're from the East Slope versus the West Slope, we have to do our best together. So that's my tidbit.
Well, thank you, Tim and Dina. And so we'll have plenty of time for questions. And so just to kick it off, I thought I'd ask, so this is, assume most folks in the room are planners, and I've worked with a lot of planners, and you are some of the busiest people I know. Why should they take time of their busy day to talk to if they're planners, talking to their planning directors, if any planning directors here, talking to your city managers, any city managers here, talking to their city council, why should they care about this?
Why should they care about water conservation? How long do we have? I mean, 45 minutes, perfect. You don't have anything left to say, right?
No, fine, Tim.
No, I mean, we don't really have a choice, right? I mean, unless someone knows that we can get a bunch more water that can actually be used, especially at the municipal level. We're kind of at a point now where we have to. We're not, growth isn't slowing down. We're not going to, we hear it all the time. Why can't you just stop growth? Go talk to city council, right? I don't know of very many, I know of one city in the western U.S., Boulder City, Nevada, that had a moratorium on development. There was one in Utah as well, but it was a really small town. We're not going to stop growing. We're not going to stop needing water. And you can't just go buy it anymore. There's not a bunch of water resources out there. Everybody's fighting for the same thing. So it's really, really important to care. I would say that the reason where water conservation comes in, and if you're planners and you're working on policies that, are landscape policies or places policies as you continue to grow, the reason to come talk to water conservation is because we're different. Like, there's no degree in water conservation. We all come from different areas. We're in this because we care about it. My team is, I'm a landscape architect. I have a guy with a history degree, someone with a planning degree, a biology degree. We have a bunch of different lenses to look at things through, so we can offer a bunch of information or a bunch of different ways to look at things. So yeah, come talk to us. We like to talk, especially about water.
So I'm a hydrologist, so I'm a data nerd, and so water's my passion, right? And so we all have our own internal passion, but I really think, again, it's good about breaking down these barriers. If you live in the city that you actually work, why don't you go get a free water audit with water conservation? See what it's about, whether it's an outdoor water audit or indoor water audit. So that way is a good step. And maybe you can do it on paid time, if you really switch your boss around. But that's a good way to actually get to know each group. And I'm also trying to do the same. I've only been in, I was a COVID hire. I feel like I'm a COVID baby, but I'm a COVID hire. So I don't know anybody. And I think there's even folks that I haven't met yet. And so going out into the field with them to see what they have to go in their daily lives or doing those inspections are really important, because when we are writing things like landscape irrigation design criteria, I wrote this thing, I'm like, I didn't know what all the steps were or what all your processes were, and I would ask and ask and ask, but sometimes going out into the field would be the best for me to get some insight. So I think there's certain ways to be a little bit working and collaborating always together, and again, we're open. Everybody in water conservation, we're pretty much from the same people, right? We like to talk, we have a lot of knowledge, and we want to help.
In my experience, that's very true. So one other question I guess I had, then let's open it up to the audience, was there might be folks in the room who say, yeah, that sounds great, and I'll take some time out of my day to talk to my boss about that, but our city council will never adopt that. It just doesn't work for us. What has been the response been like and the support been like from your electeds?
It's been fantastic. And every municipality is different, but at the City of Aurora, For the most part, our city council has really been on board. The ordinance I talked about was actually driven by our mayor, which makes it a lot easier to get an ordinance done. I thought that we would get there in 10 years, maybe. And then when I was told in January that we had to have the ordinance done by May, I wasn't real excited about that, but just excited that they were on board. It passed council unanimously for both the first and the second reading. So it's in the same way that us as a community in Colorado either understand water or we're starting to understand water. It's in the media. Our residents are understanding water. And so my experience is the city councils do as well. They understand where we're at and understand where we need to go. And as long as you come, with something that makes sense and have the support of the community, which is really important, especially the development community, get them on board, and they're pretty open-minded to get these things through.
Another thing is that you can still borrow in big, okay? That's what I've always discovered, because again, if you're the single person trying to do everything, this is what happens. So what I've kind of realized is that I would try to see what the other people in the region are doing, because developers have a tendency to kind of stay in the regional area. So if one developer is used to a neighboring community doing something, you can take some of that language and be like, oh, I know what to do with that. And add that to your criteria or add that to some of your documents. I think one other aspect is that Greeley's a little bit unique. We actually have a water board, water and sewer board. And so we're a little bit buffered in terms of some of the political attributes, but however, it just takes a long time. Tim said 10 years. Well, with this landscape policy plan for water efficiency, this is just a plan. This is kind of like, hey, we want to do this. This was 2015, 7 years, okay? So that takes a long time. But however, you can look at it in multiple ways where, for example, I decided to do a landscape and irrigation criteria that's in our engineering standards. So when a developer comes in, they have to go through all these engineering standards for water and sewer. So then why not have everything in one bundle for them? And so if I put it in as a criteria, let's say that I had a minor, I needed to do a minor amendment to this, and I had, oh crap, I didn't use the right word. I used lawn, versus curb appeal or whatever you want to call it. So maybe I want to change that language. I can in the criteria, but if it's in code, it's harder, right? So I was trying to be wise in that way for our own time and our own energy. But however, you still have to have certain things in code. So it is a lot of communication. We do on an annual basis. We have a report that we put out that's both for the public and the city council members. We take our city council members and our board members on tours, and so we bring them out to our facilities. We tell them why we need this money. We have them look at our 2 water treatment plants, and one's in Fort Collins and one is in Loveland, and look at our 6 different reservoirs that we have that are miles away from Greeley, and really have them understand our infrastructure and the reason why we need to have water conservation.
Any questions from the audience?
Can you talk a little bit about, in your communities, is HOA education and engagement a big part of what you do? Or maybe property owners and getting their buy-in and understanding of what you're trying to do and the importance of it?
You betcha. Big time. So a lot of it has been doing education with our HOAs and then incentivizing our HOAs. So at some point, they kind of realized how much water they're spending just irrigating these common areas. And so they're really trying to either reduce their water bill or just trying to do the right thing. They're like, we see the news, we just want to do the right thing. But it takes years to build up that relationship. It begins first when we do our free outdoor water audits with them. Like, hey, you can save a lot of money just be doing cyclone soak, woo, But then going back through and saying, hey, let's do a walk through your whole entire area. This is the area that we want to get rid of maybe some turf. This is all in one irrigation zone. Nobody's over here. Why don't we start with this? So trying to give them some of the ideas, a lot of hand-holding, but definitely it's all about education and communications, especially with our HOAs.
Yeah, and I'll just second that. We had our team huddle this morning, 13 individual HOA board meeting presentations just this month already. So HOAs are a big deal. The benefit of working with HOAs or multifamily properties from the landscape perspective is from the admin side, you can get a large value for, you're not dealing with, all 300 individual homeowners within the neighborhood. I will mention there is a challenge with HOAs, and it's always funding. So for these large landscape replacement programs, many HOAs just don't have the money. And, to budget for that, we're talking, some of these are $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 projects. So that's where on the Aurora side, our opportunity to give them more than that 50 grand and kind of bind them to this allocation with a penalty where they're paying back the rebate. So our ratepayers who funded the rebates aren't losing money if we don't see the savings. Those come in to kind of help incentivize the HOAs.
It's kind of an open-ended question around equity related to all this, but I guess the example I would use is the LOAX question, which is what about the trees? I was intrigued by tree lawns going away from Colorado Springs. There's areas of our city, particularly in the southeast, that most of the landscaping has been abandoned already. It's got the lowest tree canopy where it's the hottest, driest, poorest area of the city. So, reconciling, are trees okay? Are we going to lose the tree canopy along with losing the high, thirsty grass?
The goal is not to lose the tree canopy and to develop programs that ensure that the tree canopy stays, that urban forest stays. So it's really about how do we treat the soil, how do we treat the space when that grass is removed. Most of the trees that are in turf are really just being irrigated by the turf irrigation. They're not being irrigated correctly anyway. But it is something that we do have to think about, more so on the residential side, and making sure that our residential customers understand that, hey, you've been irrigating this tree with your sprinklers for the last 30 years. Now we're asking you to change how you irrigate, making sure that they're putting in proper irrigation so that we're not losing the trees. The tree canopy value, the fiscal value, that's all really important.
So that's back to the water energy nexus. So a paper came out in 2021 that came out from the USDA, U.S. Forest Service, and their research basically said that trees actually do water conservation because they actually save the amount of water because you're going to irrigate a little bit less underneath that potential canopy. But there's also different irrigation techniques. There's a one that we just installed into our parking lots that basically, it's like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like this, but kind of deeper, and it has perforated aspects to it. So what the drip system does, it fills up that cup, essentially, and then feeds that tree for a longer period of time. So just because they were used to necessarily that constant irrigation that was going on over 3 days a week between 10, not between, 10 and 6, that type of aspect would still give enough water for that tree to survive and also to thrive. So we are worried about our urban landscapes. In the past, I did a crispy lawn survey with the city of Cheyenne. So I did that for 2 years in a row to figure out what blight is going on in terms of our community. Is our water rights causing blight issues, for example? So kind of monitoring that throughout the community, working with urban forestry, especially on verdant aspects and making sure that trees can still be planted, because there is those values. But I really like your question a lot, so thank you.
This is kind of like a two-part question. I didn't hear you guys talk about non-potable water for irrigation at all, and what that means and having those systems and what that does for the system in general. And in that vein, I didn't hear you guys talk about agriculture and industry and what we need to be looking at because tree lawns, it's cute to beat up on those, but meanwhile, the 80% of the water, I think, is going towards agriculture and industry. So if we're going to conserve, it seems like we need to approach it from that angle.
I'll take this one. So Greeley is really big into agriculture. I mean, that's our heart, and that's where we basically were founded. So Greeley actually leases about the same amount that our residential uses in water. So for those lands. So we do a lot of augmentation. When we do conserve water, we're making sure that we can still lease water for agricultural production. And so that's one aspect. For non-potable type of systems, so we're actually requiring that any larger landscapes, so not single-family residents, but anybody else that's having common spaces like HOAs, those multifamily like large areas, commercial properties, that they have to use non-pot water. So that's going to be coming on for the future. So they'll have to develop some type of non-pot pump system and pond that would then serve as a regional port for the whole entire area. So that criteria is hopefully going to be passed at the end of December for the city of Greeley. We're looking at that is not necessarily a solve-all end, because it really depends on what your landscape is going to be like. Because if you just put in thirsty turf again, then you're going to have the same problems, because you're going to have longer shoulder months. Those ditches only run certain times a year. And so we still have to feed water in like maybe that April-May time period, or kind of what we're seeing over in October. I remember there was a couple of really warm days in the Front Range, even November, and I was like, I gotta give my tree some water. So again, there is the benefit between water conservation and agriculture. It's not really well talked about because not everyone is in that situation in terms of land production. But ultimately, that's a lot that Greeley has done in terms of conserving that water. In fact, we have one staff member that just deals with our agricultural community, making sure that they have the amount of water that's allocated for them, that their farms are still productive. Because if you go out and you buy those baby carrots that say made in Colorado, they're from Greeley. Or those onions that you get from Walmart in the big bag, they're from Greeley. And we want to continue that culture and that heritage.
Yeah, I can't add anything about the ag, nor do I want to. Pretty touchy subject. But I will talk about non-potable a little bit. So in Aurora, we have a reuse system. Where we're limited is the capacity of the system. So it's 5 NGD, 5 million gallons a day. And we're pretty much tapped out in the summer. And that water is water that was originally used indoors. It goes into the Metro wastewater facility, comes back. Well, we actually pick it up before it gets to Metro for our Sand Creek facility. We use it for most of our parks, city, municipal landscapes, golf courses. We just currently don't have the ability to expand it or the money to expand it. We just finished a reuse water study a couple years ago, and we're looking at it again through our integrated water master plan part 2 that we're going through right now. To Dina's point, even when we're using reuse or raw is non-potable as well, it's still water, right? So how do we, our focus is more on how do we reduce that baseline demand across the city? If we're talking about reuse non-potable, at least we're getting a second use out of that before we lose it, so there's value there. It's just trying to find the balance of that value versus the cost. I think you will see Aurora have a larger capacity for our reuse system at some point. Infrastructure is extremely expensive. If you don't have the infrastructure there, you're tearing up roads, putting in the pipe. So it's something we do think about, something we evaluate quite often to see, does it make sense to expand it into newer areas? We don't have a mandate, but we have different water portfolios, which is always something important to realize with the different water providers as well.
Can you speak to like alternative grasses? I know our municipality has been challenged with alternative grasses, irrigated native seed, non-irrigated native seed. And we limit turf grass, and we have for years, but the installation of native seed, say the non-irrigated, you're smiling, you already know where I'm going.
I do.
No one knows how to install it, no one knows how to maintain it, and it just doesn't work, and it looks like a disaster. So any thoughts? What's Aurora doing maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're absolutely right about native seeds. One of my baby projects was the one I mentioned about that, we call it the Z-Zone program, so that was allowing developers to put in native seed, not paying the tap fee. The problem is about 90% of it looks like garbage. There's a couple things. Irrigated native is not the end of the world. Go to Colorado Springs, their water conservation group and their pros department, or their parks department, have done a bunch of amazingly beautiful native grasses that get just a little bit of water. It doesn't need a bunch, but a little bit goes a long way with the native grasses, so that is an option. Non-irrigated native can work as long as the establishment is done correctly. So the biggest challenge we see with native, as you mentioned, establishment and maintenance for those first 3 years. Well, a lot of times what we see is when developers do it, it's not built into the contract, so they seed it and walk away, and then you don't get grass, you get weeds. And that becomes a code enforcement issue. So now we're trying to tackle it from a different standpoint. As far as other turf alternatives, there are quite a few out, well, I don't want to say quite a few, there's a few out there. For us in Aurora, you can use any turf that's in that 15 inches or less to qualify for that water-wise landscape. I think the biggest exciting one that's coming out now is a Bermuda grass called Tahoma 31. That is new, Tahoma 31. It's a Bermuda grass hybrid. There's some testing going on in some different municipalities. If you look at the websites for the solid growers, they say 75% less water. I tend to not believe those until we see some data. Castle Rock's doing a test. Colorado Springs is doing a test, so we're waiting to see the cold hardiness and the actual amount of water it needs to be viable and actually look good. Buffalo grass, if you can find it in sod form, is another good one. The challenge with using turf alternatives is, planners know all about spaces, right? We're creating spaces. It has to still meet the function. And most of the turf alternatives don't meet the function of turf. So if it's in a high active use space, play areas, backyards, sports fields, bluegrass is okay there. As John mentioned earlier, or Victoria might have mentioned, we're not anti-bluegrass anywhere, just quit putting it in areas where you're just mowing it. So turf alternatives make sense in a lot of areas. We're starting to see more options. I think as a lot of our communities move more and more away from bluegrass, we'll see even more options come to the Front Range that will work for our uses.
In fact, there's actually a specialized group that's putting together a manual that's going to be available for everybody. Say basically, this is how you can, this is the type of grass you put in, this is how you maintain it, this is how you have to keep on it for a while. But again, it comes down to the perception. We're used to a certain type of color or a certain type of look, and then, having it not necessarily shaved all the way down. Some of the grasses actually have to be long because they'll reseed, and when they reseed, they'll drop their seeds, and guess what? You've got free seed. But people don't know that, and they just keep mowing it all the time, and then that's the worst thing you can do for that landscape. So once we have this manual together, we can distribute that out, put it on different websites, and get that information out. So it's actually a joint effort. So we kind of formed a coalition. So we're both members. I'm actually the co-chair of the Rocky Mountain Section Water Conservation Group, and Tim's on it. I mean, there's a gazillion of us. I think it's like 43 of us across the whole entire state. And so we're putting together this manual because we saw the need for it. Colorado Springs is taking the lead on it, and then each of us are putting in our own opinions on it. So Greeley would be a reviewer, for example. We take our staff time out, and we divide and conquer a lot.
Hi, thank you very much for being here today. This is great. We'll stand up so I can see you. Feels weird to just talk around. I know. I feel like I need to stand too. I'm with the City of Fort Collins. I want to go back to the non-potable question. I'm really glad that was asked because that's something that we're dealing with quite a bit is proposals from developers, particularly those with metro districts, to install non-potable systems. And a major concern that we're running into is groundwater-based non-potable systems and the water quality issues due to high salinity that can come with that, and the impact on landscape establishment and maintenance over time of groundwater sources. So I'm wondering if either in Aurora or Greeley, you've had some experience with that type of non-potable system. We've got raw water coming down through ditches too, and dealing with the seasonality issue that you mentioned, Dina, and trying to figure out how do we get an adequate water supply with a non-potable system. But a lot of developers are then proposing groundwater as a supplementary source, and we have a lot of concerns about that.
Yeah, I'll take this one because I've got some experience from actually the City of Cheyenne. So the City of Cheyenne actually had a purple pipe, so the physical reuse, so it's coming from the wastewater treatment plant. And they were really worried. They were putting it on parks and school districts for their athletic fields. And they were really worried about what they call the sodium absorption ratio, SAR. Have you guys heard about that? I see some nods. So basically it's about the salt, or the salt content that's actually in the water. So what they did is they actually looked at how much salt content is in the wastewater, what it is after that treatment process, and then putting it on the ground. And so they realized that salt content did go up. So there's actually mechanisms to treat it prior to putting it onto landscape, like gypsum, for example, will counteract that SAR. So what you can do is that you can do it at two folds. You can either have it as a point source, so you have a pond, essentially, that you have all your reuse water come in, you do that treatment before it's be sent out into the irrigation system, or also working with whatever that municipality aspect is on if there's any trains they can put on their end to reduce those amount of that SAR. So Cheyenne was like really looking at that because that's what they were really focused on. Now for the City of Greeley, we only, when I say non-pot, I'm saying raw water only, so it's ditch water. And most of that quality is actually kind of good because it's better than just having it out of the tap. Adds a little bit extra nutrients. You do have to do some filter aspects to it too. Snails like to grow in there, like these little snails, like will cause havoc on your irrigation system. So you have to have certain filters and infrastructure, but you can have that again once you have a pump station, you have a pond, and then you can have that filtration prior to going out to the distribution of the irrigation system. Tim's got nothing.
All right, I beat Tim for once.
Hi, I have a question for you. Stephanie, City of Westminster. Tim, I've bothered you, I think, a couple times in the last month, so thank you for that. Has there been any discussion on salt-tolerant ground covers outside of the discussion of native seeds? Because that could be an alternative within those narrower right-of-way landscape strips.
Yeah, actually, because mag chloride is another aspect that they put on the roads. And then they take that and then they shovel the sidewalks or whatever, and they put it right onto that landscape. So one of those, there are those salt-tolerant type of plant species that are out there. We have been noting those specifically for Cheyenne, kind of like these are flag marks of those that might be the best suited in these particular areas. And so that's one way to kind of give that plant list as a recommendation. So that's in the back of my mind. Right now I'm just trying to I'm doing one of these up a hill slope that's like landscaping down all the time. I'm like, so it's on my to-do list, I'm sorry to say.
Well, I heard something about the Botanic Gardens starting to look into that.
Oh, the Botanic Gardens, and I also believe that CSU's campus over in Fort Collins was looking at SAR, because that's the one that did the study for the City of Cheyenne, and I think that was back in like 2015 or so. So it's out there. There's information out there. You just got to figure out what resource is the best, and CSU might be the best. In terms of, sorry, CSU grad, anybody else? Woo! Got my master's.
I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach on this one. We have not looked specifically at seed that does better with the salt, but I guess my stance on it would be in those areas where mag chloride's an issue, or kind of those strips that you mentioned, the curbside landscape / ex-tree lawn. I'm not even certain that native seed is a great option there. Most native grasses aren't meant for high volume traffic. And if we're trying to create walkable areas, and those areas next to sidewalks are going to get walked on, they're going to get mag chloride on them. In Aurora, for new development, as I kind of mentioned, not only will they not be allowed to have cool season turf there, they can't have spray irrigation. And so back to kind of circling back to irrigated native as an option to have a better aesthetic and a healthier plant, I would recommend not having seed or having native seed native grasses per se in those narrow strips anyway, regardless if we find some that are more salt tolerant.
Hi, my name is Brent Caslin. I am a landscape designer in the Denver area. And I can actually answer your question. There is a grass called saltgrass that CSU worked on it was in my undergrad. It's like 2006, they helped the USGA to create a turf type saltgrass that would actually grow, and it is growing in the ditches along highways. And you can see it now, it's blooming, it's pretty. You don't need to cut it. It actually grows about this tall. But so that's a good option, and so the USGA has that. And then my question was for you, Tim. We work together a lot on irrigation plans. Is the Z-tap going away?
No.
Okay.
No. The Z-tap, so what he's talking about is, again, the Z-zone where the developer doesn't pay the tap fee for those Z-zone areas. It won't go away. What I see long-term is, and Dina's lucky they already have water budgets where she lives or where she works. What I'd like to see is kind of a hybrid. And we've done this with our parks department already, where instead of it being the $0 per square foot for zero water after 3 years, they can kind of tell me, hey, this is how much water we're going to want to put on our native. I can back into the math and say, okay, well, here's the allocation you're going to pay for, and here's what your tap fee is going to be. So that we're maybe doing a better job at not setting these things up to fail. Now, they can work without the irrigation after 3 years, but a lot of times we learn from things that we think are great, kind of back to the comment of you can draw it on a plan and it doesn't always work. We can come up with programs and policies that, excuse me, don't always work either. So I think that one will evolve to where we still have this incentive for the native grasses. It'll be like a lower fee instead of the zero, and give them some allocation to irrigate it, so we're getting higher quality landscapes in those native areas.
Other questions?
Hi, I was wondering if you have any insight into water-wise policies or best practices specifically for riparian areas along rivers and streams, and how to best approach those areas.
I'll take this one. It's all mine. Okay, so in my former life, I used to work a lot with regulators in the state of Wyoming, and for riparian areas, there's actually a, I'm trying to remember what the tool is called. There's actually a tool that gives you that qualifications of what that riparian zone could be and what it can do in terms of water quality, filtration aspects, and things like that. And then we're trying to get that tool to be essentially the way to do more like stream restoration aspects too. Because we were really working on securing funds for Crow Creek. Anybody know Crow Creek that runs through Cheyenne? Nobody knows about it because it's hidden. But anyway, trying to do more stream restoration and looking into those riparian zones. They actually, in Cheyenne, they've done a stormwater basin structure with the Department of Environmental Quality, with DEQ, that actually filters some of those stormwater and then capture the sediment and then prior for discharge. So if you wanted to do a tour, that's a really good area. Another one was, and I know I'm like, I can't remember what the tool is called. Let me look it up. I'll get you my business card and I'll figure it out for you. Okay, great, thanks. So sorry, I'm kind of like, I don't remember that one, but yeah.
Any other questions? Well, we heard about SAR, Tahoma 31, and cycle and soak. No good water conservation panel goes without those topics. Just to wrap up, we're finishing a few minutes early. There's a lot of resources available to help you on this path to incorporate water efficiency, looking at your land use codes, all these things. Contact Victoria, myself. I'm sure Tim and Dina would be happy to share. One unsolicited plug is for the Snow Institute's Growing Water Smart program. Waverly is here, who does that program. I'm not sure if she mentioned it in her panel, but it's one of the coolest water programs in Colorado. Excuse me. And it's a 3-day workshop that brings together land use planners, water providers, parks, elected officials, everyone, to hash out a plan to do some of the things that we've heard about today. So